Philip, if I strive to want to really know what reality is about, one of the places that I'm told to look is to metaphysics. Now, the word metaphysics today has sort of a bad connotation. Some people think it means the occult or such obscure ideas about angels dancing on pins and all of that. But as a metaphysician, what can you tell me about how I look at reality?
I have to say first that we metaphysicians have earned our reputation. We've been abstract. We've been out of touch with human existential concerns. We've been out of touch with results of science. The only way that metaphysics could be helpful for that question would be if it spends a long time listening carefully to the results of science to see exactly what it is that we now do know about interpreting quantum mechanics, about the origin of life, about the evolutionary process, and about mind and brain.
So all levels of science or awareness we have to know. Now, my first question would be, if you know all of that, why do I need metaphysics?
Oh, that's a great question, because that's where metaphysics is born. Metaphysics is a fascinating phoenix. We kill it, and it rises from the ashes. Mm-hmm. In the 20th century, we killed it. We killed it in the 1920s. It was called logical positivism. And we said all that can be known are empirical facts, and anything beyond that is meaningless. A.J. Ayer said it is as meaningless as "'twas brillig and the slithy toad gyre and gimble in the wave," right? Absolutely no cognitive meaning whatsoever. And so we killed it off and we did science. And then amazingly, we found it necessary to raise some questions at the boundaries of those sciences.
Well, let's go into it, because that's really important. So what caused the resurrection, if you will, of metaphysics?
Let's just take a few examples. We found that there was a certain unknowability at the quantum level, which we express mathematically as Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And we found it had something to do with a measurement of quantum states. Something happened that we didn't understand. And that led to the most fascinating rebirth, phoenix-like, of metaphysics. Is reality at the core indeterminate? Does it take a subjective observer to resolve an indeterminacy into real reality? Is reality at the basis bits of information that we draw together? Mm-hmm. Each of those then gave rise to the need to raise these fundamental metaphysical questions. And a new kind of metaphysics was reborn. Not one dictated by Plato, Aristotle in the Middle Ages, one with scientists struggling over the very empirical data that they work on.
What else besides quantum mechanics has driven this?
We could take the genetic revolution in biology, and we could ask, what is it that drives the evolutionary process? It's so ironic that in the very years that we completed the genetic reduction, we mapped the human genome, we found out that it didn't provide sufficient information to explain life.
You know, it was only 30,000 genes when people had thought it might be 90 or 120, and it was much fewer than expected.
So we found out that what living things are is some interesting combination of genetic material and environmental influence.
How about the development of the field of consciousness, which has really blossomed in the last couple of decades, where people are taking it seriously? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Has that driven metaphysics to become more relevant?
Yeah, there's another example, and for me, the most fascinating of all. So we're in an age when we're able to understand neurological processes and how they correlate with thought. You would hope, as a scientist, that you could then take that step and through the neurological processes construct consciousness. But it turned out, apparently, that we can't do that bridge. We can correlate two things which in some sense are different.
Okay, so now we're showing why metaphysics has been resurrected. So, what now does metaphysics do? What do you contribute to any of these? The quantum physics level, the genetic code, the nature of consciousness, whatever you want. What can you contribute?
Here's the metaphor I would use. Imagine the metaphysician as somebody who has his feet or her feet firmly grounded in the sciences, but has a leash, like the spacewalk that occurs outside of the space platform. And you have some space to float around, but you're always tethered back to the firm ship of reality.
So where have you floated?
In consciousness, for example, it seems that there's this capacity which is more than the sum of the parts. How am I going to think that? Is there an eternal soul? Doesn't seem plausible to me. Is it some apprehension of a mind-like nature of reality? Perhaps. Is there something about personhood which is emergent and metaphysically real within the world? Has a world of dead matter produced living mind?
All great questions, very interrelated, questions that common people ask. You don't have to be a metaphysician to ask those kinds of questions. I can even do it. But if I am a metaphysician, what are the techniques that are used to try to make progress on those questions? What are you doing differently than a normal person would?
Yeah. What most people don't do are two things. First, to formulate specific hypotheses, and then to try as hard as possible to falsify them.
Okay.
We understand that science does that, but when it comes to metaphysics or religion, then we think we don't need the hypothetical method. We'll just grab onto one answer and proclaim it as true.
Right.
And what I'm advocating is that we take a question like the nature of consciousness. We look at the most plausible option, a small number, and then we try to test them to see which ones do the most justice to the scientific data and which ones are the most coherent within themselves and with the rest of human experience.
Are you telling me that we should use the scientific method to extend ourselves beyond science? Is that contradictory?
No, that's exactly what I think is the human condition. What drives it is the attempt to be reasonable about ultimate questions that humans face. And what drives it also is our constant, I want to say, existential quest. I need to know, what is it to be a human person? What does it mean to be human? As an animal that knows it will die, I find myself confronted with those questions. And I have no option other than to try to formulate answers.
And doing it from a metaphysical standpoint, from a metaphysical way of thinking, add something that we can't get through any other method?
That question presupposes that we have to add something that's not already there. I suggest that
that you're finding something that other people, whether they're scientists or theologians, haven't found.
No, I disagree. We're already in the midst. It's as if we live in this water, this sea, which transcends the empirical shore. We find ourselves always already pervaded by questions that go beyond what's empirically discernible.
Okay.
And either we say, no, you're not allowed to pursue those questions because we in a scientific age know that nothing meaningful can be said about them, or you give yourself permission to entertain the questions. And if you entertain the questions, my only plea is that we do it with as much reason and rationality as we can muster.